dear art friends. Congratulations, you are joining again. A new episode in my art podcast. Today I am speaking with art historian Laura Heeg. Of course, as always, we will learn personal details about her, from her and about her. But then Laura was also part of the jury for the Lüben workshop Heeg. And in this role, she helped decide which artists will be participating this year in the 17th workshop week Lüben. And in that context, Laura will tell us what the whole process at the workshop week Lüben is actually like. And she will introduce us to which artists the yes pleased. And of course, she also tells us a few side information. The real depth you have to experience live on site at the workshop week Lüben in Lüben from June 27th to July 7th, 2025. And it should be mentioned here, I will also be there, as I will be recording live podcasts with the artists. So come there. You can meet the artists, many other very, very exciting personalities. But more on that in another episode. And now, enjoy my conversations with Laura Heeg.
How does the art scene tick? Everything we always wanted to know about art. A podcast by and with Petra Lawson.
Hello, Laura Heeg.
Hello, Petra Lawson.
I greet you. A warm welcome to my podcast.
Thank you for allowing me to be here.
Very, very nice. Laura, today we are discussing two things. First, it's you, what you do, why you do it, how you do it, and why you are ultimately speaking with me. Because there's something entirely different involved, namely the Lüben workshop week.
I'm happy.
Your start was in 2007 with a degree in art history and general and comparative literature studies in Mainz and Bologna. What is comparative literature, Laura?
So at that time in 2007, I completed my degree. Back then, it was still a magistra or magister male form. And comparative literature is, the subject is called general and comparative literature, but the comparative part is often referred to as comparative studies. I wanted not focus or limit myself to a specific language area. That means if you study English, then it is clear it primarily involves the English language and English literature. The same with the German language and German literature if you study German studies. And I actually wanted to view the whole thing across different language areas. And that is exactly what happens in comparative literature. For example, you have seminar topics where if it's about fairy tales, you don't just look at German fairy tales, but maybe also Scandinavian, Italian, or whatever is part of the seminar. And yes, that interested me. But over time, even though I studied two majors, it has become the less prominent major, while art history has taken up more and more space.
Okay. Well, I just imagine it's hard to study art history. A lot of reading, a lot of memorization. But when you have an interest in something, you don't have to learn it, because then it's just in your head. Right?
Yes, exactly. That's what I would have said too. So the moment you're interested in something, you enjoy reading about it. And yes, of course, you read a lot. But what's great about art history compared to other studies, or perhaps more to the humanities, mathematics and natural sciences were never my thing. I can't write chemical formulas or calculate mathematical formulas. But The great thing about art history is that you're not just dealing with books and book knowledge, but you also look at a lot of art. Even during your studies, you go on excursions, sometimes travel abroad, you work on art spaces, also geographically. For example, during my studies, I actually specialized in medieval sacred architecture, or I am still specialized in my studies. And I still know quite a bit about this area and still look at it during my vacation, even though I no longer do it professionally. And then there was, for example, an excursion where we traveled through Burgundy for 14 days and looked at the development of medieval church construction using the churches that are still standing there.
Yes. Alrighty. Yes, it's exciting. It's definitely interesting. Then, after your degrees, you went through various activities. You were an art mediator in museums and cultural institutions. And you also started relatively early to work for the Schirnkunsthalle Frankfurt. That was in 2011, and you are still working there. In between, you then engaged in various activities such as teaching assignments at the art history and art education institutes of the universities in Mainz, Gießen, and Frankfurt. And in 2013, you were again an employee at the Schirnkunsthalle Frankfurt. And there you are now what?
I have been the head of the education department for 2.5 years now. Art education, that sounds relatively complicated and many people cannot quite imagine what it entails. But if I say museum education, most people immediately know what it means. However, we are an art gallery without an existing collection and not a museum, and therefore we cannot say museum education.
Yes, yes, you could say HAL pedagogy, but that doesn't quite capture it.
Yes, exactly. And because you mentioned the activities, so the teaching assignments, they actually run in parallel. For example, at the University of Gießen, it is always in the winter semester. It has just ended recently and they stem from my professional activities. So it also involves practical application for the students. So the art education talent from people who work in this field and are not simply employed at the university and who teach it, so to speak, detached from an application area.
Yes, yes. Why did you go into art mediation?
That was actually more of a coincidence, like so many things in my life. Also, always a bit of coincidence. I've had good experiences with coincidence. Ultimately, as an art historian, when I graduated, the job market was very tight, generally for the humanities. And then it's like you see how you can earn a bit of money alongside your studies. And my thought was actually relatively early on to do it with at least what I learned during my studies to combine. Professionally, I didn't have any ambitions in that area initially. I thought maybe I would end up either in monument preservation or stay at the university. And during my studies, I already gave tours in various museums that wasn't always just connected to art. For example, I conducted tours at the Gutenberg Museum about the history of book printing and discussed a bit about the differences between medieval manuscripts and then the development towards printed works. Book, or I worked at the Stadel Museum as a freelance art educator in various formats. I was a tour guide taking entire groups of visitors by bus or plane to Italy and England, where after to look at the art with the people for the travel themed subject, it was simply an activity that combined various things for me. One was, of course, earning money, and the other was also, it showed me that I can learn to deal with the audience and challenges, especially as a tour guide. You are the only contact person, even if the trip is organized by the company, for that one becomes active, actually organized. But that is initially abstract for the fellow travelers. One is the person responsible both for the content delivery and for organization. So it was my task to be at the ferry on time with the tour bus and to take the booked crossing. Such things coincide with content delivery. And then it was also attractive for me. I can engage with art and artistic content. And as a tour guide, I can also travel, which I would have to pay for if I were doing it alone. And here I get paid for it.
Yes, exactly. The problem was solved really well. Yes, and now let's switch over. What of everything we've learned about you has made you particularly suited to work for the craft workshop week Lüben? And when we talk about this work, what exactly do you do for them?
So I was asked by the organizing team of the workshop week if I would like to be a jury member for selecting the participants for the workshop week taking place this summer. And I was surprised that they considered me because usually institutions are familiar with curators. That is not my role. Instead, I am just an art mediator. And then I found it challenging, but totally exciting. Yes, because it's also clear that artists from all over the world can apply there. And I am part of those who will make the selection for those who will actually travel to Lüben in the summer for a week, create artworks there, install them in Lüben, meet the audience there, and accordingly, yes, to act within an artistic context with the entire surroundings.
Exactly. That is a really great task, isn't it?
Yes, that's great.
Yes, I think so too. So it's virtually a one-time commitment. They find themselves a new team every 2 years. So the workshop week Lüben takes place every 2 years. Yes, since 1991. And then they find a new team again in 2 years, probably to incorporate many, many different aspects, right?
Yes, that's how I understood it too. Well, I actually haven't delved deeper into the workshop week in the past. That's why I don't know if it's always been based on the same principle from the beginning or not, or if this is now a complete innovation regarding the jury. But I understand it in such a way that next time I will not be part of the jury, but that new people will then be approached, who will then make the selection from different perspectives.
Exactly. Just briefly as background, the workshop week was founded in 1991 with the aim is to promote understanding between people in the old and new federal states. In the meantime, the Art Symposium has become a permanent cultural institution that offers creatives from all over the world the opportunity to meet and exchange ideas. And by now, there are also 120 artists from the 25 countries who have met in Lüben since 91, worked there, and indeed, every 2 years attract hundreds of art enthusiasts. And this year, it will be the 17th workshop week, planned from the 27th of June to the 7th of July. Well, we've already discussed your tasks here. Now, of course, I'm going to just grill you a bit. I'm a curious person, and that's why I'm quite well suited for this podcast or podcasts in general. And how did the process go exactly? How do you reach out to the artists? So, how did you get the artists this year? I can still imagine back in 91 at the start, there wasn't much information available for the artists. You probably had to approach it differently than now, after 16 workshop weeks.
How did you get in touch with the artists?
Yes, so there was a call to apply. It was widely distributed in various media, very strongly, of course, on social media, and could actually be shared there. I myself also shared it because I felt it was part of my responsibility. And then various artists obviously became aware of it and submitted applications. These primarily consisted of a type of portfolio and, of course, also certain information about the person. And then the whole thing was collected and given to us, made accessible to those sitting on the jury. So we had, in a way, entire digital folders full of information about the respective artists, but also their positions, work samples, how they have worked in the past, information on which medium they work in. And from that, we were actually able to make a selection, and each of us created their personal short list, but then we met together, debated, and considered how the selection of only 15 artists would be made.
Don't we have 17 established artists? 50% of them are not older than 30 and 3 young talents?
The young talents, we on the jury were not responsible for that. That was a different area. So we did not select the young talents. And then, in addition to the 15, there are also 2 artists who are on the organizing team. We did not select them either. That is handled by other committees.
Yes, then we also reached 20. Then I understood. Exactly. And did they all show you what they applied for?
Yes, absolutely, everyone.
Pre-selection. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
No, we had access to all of them. I believe it was 181 portfolios we could review in the end. And I can only speak for myself, but I can really say from my side, I looked at every single portfolio. I reviewed the information. So for each one, application files sometimes already included specific information in the file name, such as age or name. It also indicated whether the person is male or female or which country the person comes from.
Okay, I'll quickly cover the criteria as well.
Okay.
And ultimately and we received a PDF which was sent to us after the application phase was completed, where the artistic positions were already printed in smaller images. And already there it is such that certain things stand out more than other things that one might not recognize in the format. But I still actually clicked through all these folders. I then looked at the images in a larger format, and then also tried to form an image of the person based on the provided information, which ultimately is certainly not comprehensive. So there were artists, especially if they are somewhat older, who naturally have a longer exhibition list than those who may still be relatively young, but that's quite clear.
Yes, that's clear. Yes, and then we're almost there. You're incredibly fast. We've only been here for 15 minutes and we've already learned a whole lot. What criteria? What were the underlying factors? Did they probably gave you a few guidelines? Did you also develop some on your own or decide based on intuition just by looking? What were the details about that?
So we in the jury come from different institutions and also from various regional areas. And we actually haven't been given fixed criteria by the workshop week. Mm-hmm. But for my part, I really rather with a bit of my own criteria, which are a mix of the professional and viewing experience gained over a lifetime. So, for example, even though it is not my core task, I always look at the Biennales in Venice and the art represented there, but of course also through the exhibition program that the curators at my institution provide a huge amount of input on contemporary art. And at the same time, when one, like in my profession, the art mediation, then yes, must convey this art to the audience. For me, it's not about selecting the art usually, rather it's about identifying the theme of the exhibition, what is the common thread, what does the curator want to convey. Then to generate themes from it, which may also be a focus in the educational program, especially in working with school classes and young people. And in the Kunsthalle, it is truly the case that we have a very strong connection to the questions of our time. So what we think about what currently engages society. And that automatically means that in this area, for example, I have a certain predisposition without saying that during the selection of the workshop week, all the artists must obviously work politically or must obviously advocate for women's equality or the rights of use for LGBTQ communities or societal minorities. This is not so immediate, but there's always a little bit in the background when you look at a portfolio that makes you think, oh, that's something, someone is totally in tune with the times. And on the other hand, through professional activities, but also the art history, education, and visual experiences, as already mentioned, one develops in professional life. One also looks at aesthetic criteria. Or you pay attention, especially when someone like me works with the audience, then you also consider if he or she, starting from what is presented in the portfolio as artistic creation, if you assume that it will be similar to what is created during the workshop week, this can work with the location, or how does it align with the audience and perhaps their expectations? And this doesn't mean that it's important to me that the audience automatically likes it, but I also think it's a position that might initially lead to discomfort, and that's where it becomes exciting.
What exactly do you mean by aesthetic in the art field? I find that a really difficult word in the art field.
That is actually incredibly difficult, and it also depends on viewing experience. But there are, of course, things that have an aesthetic impact. For example, can a message be captured? Or is the formal language or choice of colors that the artist uses unusual? Or is the medium in which the individuals work particularly interesting or sophisticated or applied with high technical quality? For example, there is an artistic position by Badedufua. I hope I am pronouncing the name correctly. He is from Nigeria and he works photographically in black and white photography. And these photographs, at first glance, had something incredibly appealing to me because on one hand, they were very clear. They were substantial, but still not revealing everything immediately. So there's a certain mysterious indefiniteness contained in the photographs, and yet one immediately saw that they were executed at the highest technical level. And then it automatically catches the eye, even if one doesn't actively have these thoughts, which I might have just articulated. So in that moment, I don't sit there and articulate it exactly like that, but I see it, and then it's a bit like a light bulb goes off in my head.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean. You just know this is something special, and thus is good. And then you have to think about why it is.
Exactly. Or also an artist, Athena Damaris, also here, maybe it is Athena Damaris, but she comes from Great Britain, and therefore I also hope here that I am pronouncing the name correctly. So this is something we have actually had, little contact about so far.
Right? We'll learn that later.
Exactly. And when we meet the artists, for example, she works with both digital print and sculpture. And the sculptures, they are unusual. So they captivate the gaze with interest because at first you can't quite categorize them. You don't know if it's something organic, something extraterrestrial, or something that might want to express something about our present. So this enigmatic element, I personally always find important, because in the moment where visitors, regardless of whether they have an artistic or art historical background, just look at a work, see it in 2 seconds, and think, aha, that's it, without having to think further about it, then I actually find that a bit regrettable and a bit of wasted potential, because art has different tasks or also different possibilities. One is that through art, one learns something about oneself and also about society. And the other is that art brings people together and initiates conversations and exchanges. And accordingly, I also look a little at the selection or artists who particularly appeal to me.
Yes. Was the topic of gender present in the criteria? So was there some kind of women-men quota that you had to consider?
Oh, I actually don't remember anymore. The selection is already... It was a few months ago. I only know that I didn't proceed that way, but I really looked for first visually at the artistic positions and then noted who I found interesting, about whom I might like to learn more.
And in some cases, it was obvious based on the photographs that were submitted of the works. For example, with Fritz
Faust, there the artist was somehow depicted, and then, okay, that's a male artist, but I didn't sit down and make a tally or anything. How many men do we have? How many women do we have? In the end, it turned out that we have more women than men, which I personally find good. From my personal, also partly feminist perspective. That was not my stated goal.
Yes. How many of you were on the jury?
In a group of three.
In a group of 3. It's also good that it's not a round number. And then
Yes.
everyone made their suggestions. How many suggestions did each person make? Because it probably doesn't work if each makes 20. No, you made 15 in this case.
Yes, exactly. In the end, 15 came out of it, but we had several rounds, and initially the number of those proposed was larger, and a sort of ranking was performed using a point system. And through that, so we submitted these proposals according to this ranking on the deadline, and from that, the first smaller selection was formed from these originally 181. The ones that I believe there were, or 180, and then in a second evaluation round, a ranking was created again, but by then a certain pre-selection had already been made. That means one no longer looked at the 180, but only at by the pre-selection determined. I do not know how many there were in total, but those were then reviewed, and a sort of ranking was also given there. And that was the point or the result that we discussed again in a meeting, virtually, of course, but still we all got together. Then we also talked again debated a bit, although now that sounds like there were many discussions or disagreements. That was not the case at all, but we could understand a lot. And we were actually very pleased with the selection that emerged, because it showed a certain diversity. And this diversity, which I find really great about the result, is also representative of current international art creation.
Does the workshop week have a motto this year? And if so, what is it called?
To my knowledge, there is no motto. Instead, it is actually the titles Workshop Week Lüben 2025. And the selection we actually made in our 3-member jury was for the category of the so-called established artists, meaning that they stand out from the young artists or young talents. But even our selection is actually overall quite a young one. So the selected participants are younger than 35 years.
Yes, okay. I assume you then also didn't have a quota for They must be painters, they must be sculptors, it must be representational, it must be abstract, and so on. So you just said you actually had no restrictions. Or, yes, there can be restrictions, but maybe it's also somehow ensuring a variety. You were completely free, and there was trust in you that you would find the right thing. And yes, that is also a compliment.
Exactly, that is definitely how I perceived it. Personally, for myself, of course, yeah, after my first visual impression and from the notes I made, I then looked at the results again with that in mind. Now, just for my selection, are different techniques represented? Are there different continents perhaps or different nations represented? So I believe if the result had been that all my first preliminary selections were from Germany, I would have actively counteracted that. But that wasn't the case. Instead, from the start, for me,
also a very, very wide mix of nationalities and indeed regarding gender association or these different media. So that shows the final selection now as well. There is painting, sculpture, performance, photography, drawing, or partially mixed forms that even extend into architecture, where graphics also play a role.
Okay. Which nations are the artists from this year?
So, in addition to participants from Germany, we have someone from Korea, 2 people from Nigeria, 1 person from Spain, Israel, Iran, Brazil, and someone from Moldova. Okay.
I would like to mention the names, of course, of the artists who are involved. Can we just hear 1 or 2 sentences from you about each individual artist, what they do?
Yes, we can go through it gladly. As I said, I'm not quite familiar with the pronunciation, especially when it goes into language areas.
We apologize at this point. Sorry if this is somehow wrong, but we just don't know any better yet. Exactly. How should we proceed? So I'll just mention the names to keep it a conversation. And then you say if it's also a one more question before we continue. The names we all mention now, they are in the final round. Yes. Does that mean that all 3 of you voted for all these names?
Oh, I don't remember exactly anymore because it was just part of the process. Yes. But then in this final round, we looked at these names precisely and we all agreed with them. Okay. So there was no veto anywhere. Okay. Or yes, exactly. There was no one we had to convince that the person deserved their place in the final selection.
Yes. Okay. So let's begin. The first congratulations goes to Damaris Athene. As mentioned, we apologize at this point for any mispronunciation if it is indeed incorrect.
Yes, but are we going alphabetically or is the selection yours? Because I have a list that's basically alphabetical. I just want to make sure I don't forget anyone in the end.
I just took what Anne-Katrin sent me, the list that was also published on social media with the photos. And why now A, B, C, D, D? Well, that's alphabetical.
No, for me, well, Damaris is the last name.
Then there is probably a mistake in it. Yes.
The
So
first on my list is Eka Jungkyung Cho, and she is a 29-year-old sculptor. She works sculpturally from Korea.
Okay. And what specifically makes her art special?
So she works with elements that make you think, oh, you somehow recognize them from everyday life. There are also references to familiar shapes like bed frames or supports, for example, but she implements them detached from their original context.
Ah, yes. Okay. Then we have Valeria Duca. Do you also have her next?
Next, I actually have Athena or Athena Damaris.
Then that was the mix-up, alphabetically.
And she works with both digital prints and sculptures. Could imagine that the sculptures partially come from a three-dimensional printer. And that is the one I mentioned earlier, which has forms where you think, oh, that might be something organic. Parts of it could be human. Maybe we're dealing with mutations here, and they are somewhat expansive and shifting between fascination and perhaps also a slight element of repulsion, which I personally always find really good, because art that simply pleases, where one goes and says it's beautiful, that is personally a bit too boring for me. So I like to challenge the visitors also in their perspectives.
I believe that art, which is liked so much, makes one tired of it after 3 or 4 weeks. Yes. I think that's exactly the kind of art that eventually is just, well, okay. So then, according to this list I have, comes Valeria Duca.
Exactly, I agree. She comes from Moldova, and she works in the field of painting, specifically figurative. So when you look at her paintings, you can recognize things, and it's almost photorealistic, which in contemporary art is not that simple, because then you actually also, somehow give the visitor or viewer some points of connection as to why they should look closely at this painting, especially when photorealism might be much more easily accomplished through photography. And she does this by using perspectives in a somewhat unusual way. Sometimes you get the impression that you're looking into rooms from the outside.
Ah, yes. Okay. Then a heartfelt congratulations to Natascha Engst-Riede.
I don't have that on my list at all. Here, next for me is Fritzi Faust.
Okay. Then he's next on my list. And Natascha isn't on your list at all?
Natascha Engstrede. She's from the field of artists in the organizing team. We did not select her in our circle.
Okay, you probably can't say much about that.
No, I really can't say anything about that.
Nevertheless, congratulations. We are happy for you. Then we will continue with Fritz Faust.
Yes, Fritz Faust works in the field of performance, and the photos that were in his portfolio that I simply assume now were stills from already performed performances. They showed unusual physical aesthetics. So, for example, there was nudity included, then someone with blue hair, and that's again something I think that creates friction points. Plus, performance is, of course, always something you have to be very open to as a viewer, and it can also become uncomfortable. There can also be situations that you have to endure. And that I find is always exciting in the encounter between performance and audience, because you never know exactly how the audience will react. So the people watching and not knowing what, are they able to withstand it, or are they appalled, or do they like it? Or sometimes there are performances where the audience can participate. I am incredibly curious about what Fritz Faust will develop in the workshop week. And yes, I am looking forward to it.
Super.
So then we have the name pronunciation challenge. Badeyo Fu.
Exactly. A young artist from Nigeria. I mentioned him earlier. He is the one with the black and white photos, which have such incredible brilliance, that very almost dramatically composed, yet initially show seemingly banal things. And simultaneously, the photographic coloration, now I have to think about how best to describe this. So photography is not in every result, or vice versa. Photography is not such that the image created in the camera is the same in the finished print, or has a certain appearance automatically in the developed photos. And the way the appearance of his photographs is, it has something slightly warm, tending towards gray.
I could imagine that he perhaps even works quite classically with silver gelatin prints, or at least as a model, because it also creates this warmth, and at the same time the photos are incredibly atmospheric. So I'm really looking forward to seeing them live, how he works and what his results are.
So that means you'll be on site and we'll meet there too. Because I'll just quickly note here, I will be on site and will be doing live podcasts. Yes, live conversations, interviews, and of course we'll record them and make them available to you. So the next one is named Pier Paolo Grandinetti.
To that, I actually can't say anything either, because that belongs to the area of young talents that we did not select.
Okay, nevertheless, congratulations, saluti, Pier Paolo. Then we have the lovely Manuela Karin Knaut. I've already featured her with 2 episodes in my podcast. I'm very happy. Best regards, Manuela. We've already arranged to celebrate with some wine in Lüben on 1 or 2 evenings. But now I'm curious about what you still would like to say. Manuela.
Yes, she works with both painting and sculpture is also a mixture of things that one immediately recognizes or with which one immediately has associations, such as, example, messenger or something similar. And I'm also very curious about how she will approach the workshop week, for instance, whether she will work with found objects or if everything will be things she created herself, and if she will work as large scale during the workshop week as it appeared in her portfolio at times.
Super.
And I believe she is also the oldest participant, who is thus a bit apart from the majority of the other selected ones.
Manuela, that's no problem at all.
No, not at all. On the contrary, we said we want diversity and also to represent the current contemporary art scene. And that naturally includes positions with experience that may already be more established.
Absolutely, of course. Still, one might not immediately want to hear that one is the oldest. But it doesn't matter. No, she'll take it the right way, for heaven's sake. Next, we have Anna Knöller.
Exactly. She is also from Germany and is at home in various disciplines. On one side, there is performance, and on the other side, there is graphic. And then there are always some references to architecture in her work. And with her, I could also imagine that she might belong to those who perhaps in what she creates lies, expresses things more politically, or that
will at least appear that way to the visitors. But I'm curious, you never know.
Say, Laura, have we already discussed Vincent Gran?
Vincent Gran is not on my list at all.
Okay, then don't do that.
Right. He's also an artist in the organizing team again. Okay, so Vincent through UNICH.
Congratulations to you. Exactly. Okay. Then let's discuss Haim Levash. Levak or Levash, sorry.
Well, he's from Israel, so I would guess Haim Levak. And yeah, he paints.
And with him, painting is more rooted in abstraction than with the previous positions that also worked with painting, which then means it also comes down to things like this, like brushwork or color selection. And yes, his compositions, even though they are two-dimensional as paintings, always have a certain spatial depth. And I am very curious about that too.
Then we have Renan Marcondes.
Exactly. He comes from Brazil and he works, I would have guessed that just now. Yes, he works with performance and also dance elements. That means it will be very exciting again how he implements it on site, whether he perhaps involves the audience or whether it is something where the audience rather finds itself in a spectator role.
Oh man, I'm so looking forward to these days on site.
Great. Then next, we have a big congratulations to Celia Meissner.
Exactly. She also draws and paints. And with her, you get the impression that she is very, well,
The question is whether she will implement it like that, but she has a way of drawing that is almost photorealistic, while at the same time they are not things one knows from reality. So they are partly abstract formations and often also monochrome, so that color plays no role, yet in the shading it is incredibly refined and intricate, giving the impression that even here the depiction breaks out of the two-dimensional space and shifts into a 3D effect.
Wow, that sounds really exciting too. Next, I say well done to Nilofar Monadian. I think he is also from Nigeria.
I really don't know. He is also part of the young talents. And it could also be that it is a woman. Yes, I think that is a feminine position.
Yes, Nilofar Monadian. Yes, I mixed up the pictures. The next one is Hen. Oh God, Nwadiokpu, I would guess he's probably from Nigeria. Exactly. Well, Nilofar Monadian is a very exotic name to me, and I wouldn't know where to place it locally. Yes.
But back to Ken, he paints, and he was one of those who immediately caught my eye while just browsing through the overall selection, because on one hand he paints very realistically, but the colors he uses, he alienates that. So one must assume that things he depicts in his paintings do not have the color they would have in reality. And that leads, first of all, it's a real eye catcher, and that leads to unfamiliar viewing experiences. As I said, painting is one of the media that has existed for thousands of years when you consider art history, and it has a long tradition. And it is incredibly difficult to create something where you think, oh, wow, I've never seen that before. And with him, I really had that, oh, wow effect.
I am pleased. Then we have Valentin Renner. Well done.
He is also one of the young talents, and accordingly, I would continue with Lorena Ruiz Pellicero or Pellicero. She comes from Spain and works in the field of installations, but often in connection with objects. And yes, it's also about slightly challenging the viewing experience of the spectators and creating unusual effects with familiar elements.
Great. The next one would be a young lady, Hani Soltani.
Exactly. She is from Iran. I also find it quite exciting, and she paints as well. So she is a painter. And with her, I could also imagine, so her paintings are again almost photorealistic, and I could imagine that her paintings often have either a socially critical background or maybe even a political component. I'm very curious about that, because it is naturally something one might assume when someone comes from countries that have faced various political challenges in recent years and who are also repeatedly involved in international conflicts. And conversely, it is known that often those who are active in artistic fields are the first to pick up on and address these issues with sensitivity. And conversely, they are also among those who particularly suffer from restrictions. That's why I am very curious about what she will implement, how she will work, how she will approach it. And yes, exactly.
Me too. Then we have Julio Vieira.
He is also from Brazil, and he paints as well. With him, it's a mix of elements where you think this is figurative again, but then still not quite right. And at the same time, I had the impression with him that certain patterns also play a role, which I would suspect either come from an indigenous context or are meant to reference one. And I am also curious to see how it will look on site with him and what he might say about it himself.
Yes. And last but not least, dear Franziska Wenz.
Exactly. She works sculpturally, she creates objects, and she often works with weaving techniques. So that means these are objects that are not necessarily representational, but that exist in different dimensions, can be very spatially immersive. And I am incredibly curious to see how she will implement that in Lüben. I can imagine that this is a form of art that, as an intervention in places the local population thinks they know, will give these places a completely new touch.
Wow. I am so curious and excited to all those we have just mentioned here, more or less in detail. Congratulations once again. And we are extremely looking forward to seeing you. And dear listeners, hold on to that. Come there. Take a look at it. That is an amazing event from the 27th of July to the 7th July in this year, 2025. This is the 17th workshop week in Lüben. A very picturesque little place. Dear Laura, that has been very interesting. Thank you very much for you've first given us insights into your person and then also how you made your selections and above all, who you selected and why you selected them and what they all do. We got a nice overview. Many thanks to you.
Yes, I thank you for having me as a guest, and now maybe a bit of self-promotion, but in the context of the workshop week, there will also be a university day. Students are especially welcome there, and I will be among the speakers.
Very nice. I also speak all the time.
On site. I'm really looking forward to it.
Great, Laura. Thank you and have a nice time. Until then.
Thank you.
How does the art scene tick? Everything we always wanted to know about art. A podcast by and with Petra Losse.